Hi, everyone. Well, actually, we're not going to be talking about magic 3,000%. We're going to be talking about something much, much more important than that, and something that drives that. So if we can rewind back to the Industrial Revolution, our ancestors' physical health was systematically destroyed by the impact of the backbreaking work that was required of them. You know, in mines, in engine rooms, in factories, they ruined their physical health. For us, in the digital revolution, it's our brains that are being quietly but just as systematically devastated. We've failed to come to terms with the demands of what it means to be digital workers. Open plan office, always on culture, the Zoom call, yeah. Just like the mines and the factories invaded and dominated our bodies, so the office and the digital world have invaded our brains. And yet it doesn't even stop there. We all know that sales is a high pressure profession, but when you layer over the top of the digital revolution, where your boss goes to bed next to you on the bedside table inside your iPhone, we have this perfect storm for our current mental health crisis. According to the health and safety executive, the effects of stress, depression, and anxiety accounted for 49% of all working days lost last year due to ill health. 49%. And 25% of employee attrition. There's a recent piece by Emma Makinson which revealed that stress is the leading cause of chronic conditions. So that's things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, for example. 75% of the disease burden in the entire of the United States is due to that. Stress is literally killing us. Okay, but maybe you would say, if you can't hack the heat, get out the kitchen, right? Or sales is tough and get a grip and pull yourself together. Has anyone ever said that to you? Of course they have. We've all met the people who talk like that. Maybe you're even thinking like that right now. But if you are like the doctors in the 1950s who said that cigarettes were good for your health, all the evidence is pointing in the opposite direction. There's something that best-in-class businesses have recognized as a trend. And those businesses that are winning are those that are putting human beings at the heart of their organizations. To quote the great Suzanne Jacobs, they are resourcing humans, not treating humans as resources. So let's look at three things that they're doing. Number one, they are creating safe spaces. Why does that matter? Our minds don't cope well with a negative. Think of what happens when you tell a child not to drop the glass on the floor. Careful, James, don't drop the glass. What happens in James's brain? He imagines the glass, then he imagines dropping the glass, then his stress levels rise as he tells himself not to let the glass slip from his hands, and the chances of the drop increase. There is no way for us to imagine not dropping the glass in this scenario. And yet, had we said, carry the glass carefully to your mother like you did so well earlier, then he would have had a fighting chance to do it properly. We emphasize the good outcome. And then we use positive reinforcement to drive the message home. In these instances, the psychologist Stephen Condy reports a 22% higher chance of success. It doesn't take much to help people to feel good about themselves. Most sales leaders started out as strong salespeople. They got promoted because they were smart, and now they have a team and they have pressure from the board and the SMT and the CEO. And so they resort to fear and to a directive approach. They don't mean to, they just don't know how to do it properly. They've probably been put under intolerable stress conditions by their own manager. How many of you out there have had a manager who does this? She's probably quite a nice person, but when the chips are down, she or he doesn't put you in a safe space. So let's talk about what happens next. You've all heard of fight, flight, or freeze, right? That's what happens next. A friend of mine is a psychologist at one of the F1 teams, Red Bull. And he told me about an exercise they undertook on one of the Red Bull drivers. 2 small cameras aimed at the eyes, watching the subtle contractions of the blood vessels as the stress ratchets up. Noise of the crowd, the threat of a rival car on your tail, trying to pay attention to the crackle of the radio, the G-force. What happens? The blood vessels contract, restricting the flow of blood to the brain, reducing the oxygen and making rational thought harder, and causing the driver's decision-making to be impaired. He makes worse decisions, and that's why they're testing it. Red Bull are correlating stress with real-world conditions and they're finding ways to reduce the stress. So imagine the same thing done to your sales team. Where does the stress arise? Probation, review, performance plan, quota, even the words are enough to terrify us. These are not safe spaces. And therefore, they're not spaces where individuals thrive or perform at their best. We have to change. So after safe spaces, let's talk about the second thing, and that's the difference between pressure and stress. So pressure is a good thing. Pressure enables performance and focuses the mind. Pressure is one of the reasons why athletes run their best race in the 100-meter final rather than in the heats. It introduces the narrowest of competitive edges, the additional hundredth of a second, which delivers gold rather than silver. And that's because pressure injects adrenaline into the bloodstream. It's the same adrenaline that allows the mother whose child is trapped under the car to lift it off her single-handed. How can she do that? In that instant, she has superhuman strength to deliver on a need that required her in the moment to deliver, and she delivered. Stress, on the other hand, is all about the cortisol, whereas adrenaline stays in the bloodstream for just a short period of time, just enough to do what is required. Cortisol hangs around for ages, and it slows us down. It makes us sluggish. It's the reason that on the wrong day, an athlete just can't find that extra ounce of strength to catch a competitor on the final bend. It makes her legs ache and it impairs her competitive advantage. As leaders, we trigger stress and we trigger cortisol when we ourselves feel stress, when we are frustrated, when we don't know what to do. Our intention may be good, but the consequence is the opposite of our intention. Our teams fail, their stress levels rise, we affect their mental health, and we fail to deliver results. So great companies find ways to relieve stress, in addition to creating spaces which are safe. The third thing they do is place their organizational values in front of everything else. Values, literally the single most abused buzzword in SaaS thinking. So many organizations I speak with have taken the time to create a value set, but their teams don't know what those values are, and they certainly don't live by them, especially when the chips are down. And yet great organizations use these as a moral code. At Ametria, we would refuse to hire demonstrably strong salespeople if they were unable to demonstrate in the interview process that they themselves had a strong moral code, that they shared the values of the rest of our organization. So the best organizations in the world create safe spaces because it improves performance. They reduce stress because guess what? Performance goes up. And they define what they care about because, yeah, you guessed it, right? When a group of people gather around a shared sense of purpose, they achieve more. So let's consider 3 practical things you can do right now to affect this kind of lasting change inside your own organization. And if you're not a sales leader, but a salesperson, what should you be looking out for? How do you recognize these companies and these leaders? 1, psychological safety, which is a term, by the way, coined by Amy Edmondson, a Harvard professor. She noticed that high-performing surgical teams made more mistakes than low-performing surgical teams. The hypothesis was that this was simply that they could admit to their errors because they felt safe to do so. As a leader, you can kickstart this culture by just being honest. I have to say, my own journey accelerated the second I realized I wasn't judged for any vulnerability I showed. Instead, people saw me as more real, more authentic. So start with honesty. Wow, this is challenging. I have no idea how we're going to do this. Let's get our heads together, put a plan in place. This kind of language extends permission to your team to be honest with themselves, and the honesty of failure and mistakes enables improvement, considered risk-taking, greater performance. Next, work on becoming a good coach and then a great coach. Coaches help you design your future and your goals. They're discerning listeners and empathic, creative, they're intuitive, they're curious. They're your partner and champion and advocate. So ask yourself, how can I champion each member of my team so that they thrive? A good way to do this is through mindful goal analysis. Work through with each of your team what their long-term goal is. Ideally, it won't be work-focused. What medium-term goals could help them attain their objective? What short-term actions can you work on with them to enable them to take steps toward their goal? Care about their goal like they were your brother or sister. And finally, number 3, be honest, be a coach, but finally lead the conversation on mental wellness. 1 in 4 of us experience a mental health issue at some point in our lives. Lead the conversation on behalf of your team and co-workers. as leaders, we have to be allies and facilitators of these conversations, and not just mental wellness, but diversity, belonging, otherness, neurodifference. Leaders walk into the unknown first, so we mustn't be afraid to do so. Let's learn the lesson of the Industrial Revolution fast. And instead of allowing the digital revolution to overwhelm us, let's be leaders of a mental health revolution, which catalyzes high performance and creates the kind of organizations that we would all like to be a part of.